My golden child sister slept with my husband and got pregnant. My parents sided with her and now demand I support their new family financially. The next time we met in court, but what I did next made them turn pale. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. Alright, let's settle in. Pour yourself a cup of coffee, or maybe some tea. I need to tell you what happened to me. It's not an easy story to tell, and it's not a pretty one, but it's mine. And I think you'll understand. My name is Margot, and from the moment I was old enough to understand words like responsible and disappointment, I knew which one belonged to me. I was the older daughter, the standard bearer. If anything went wrong in our tidy suburban house, the finger pointed in my direction first. I remember one afternoon, I must have been about 9. I was curled up on the living room sofa, lost in a book. My sister, Denise, was tearing through the house playing some imaginary game, all high-pitched shrieks and thundering feet. She was 3 years younger, and she was a whirlwind. I'd learned to just tune her out. Then, I heard the crash. A sickening sound of ceramic shattering on the hardwood floor. My mother came running in from the kitchen, her hands damp, a dish towel slung over her shoulder. Her eyes went from Denise, who was frozen, wide-eyed, to the shattered remains of her favorite porcelain vase, and then, instantly, to me. Margot! Her voice was sharp, disappointed. I didn't do it, I said, sitting up, the book falling from my lap. She was running. And you were just sitting there, Mom snapped. You're the older sister. You should have been watching her. You know how clumsy she is. I sat there, stunned into silence. Denise slowly crept over and hid behind my mother's legs, peeking out at me. I was the one who got sent to my room. Not for breaking the vase, but for not stopping the vase from being broken. That was my role. I was the family's designated adult, even when I was just a child. This dynamic defined our entire lives. If we both left dirty dishes in the sink, say, on a busy school night? For me, it was a 20-minute lecture on hygiene, respect for the household, and how I, as the elder, was setting a terrible example. For Denise? It was a soft sigh from Mom and a gentle, "Oh, sweetie, try to be more mindful next time, okay? Now go on, finish your homework." Sometimes, I honestly wondered if we lived in 2 different households that just happened to occupy the same physical space. But one night, one that still burns in my memory like a hot coal, really sums it all up. I was 16. Denise was 13. We'd both snuck out to a party at a friend's house whose parents were out of town. It was one of those rare moments of sisterly bonding. We were giggling in my bathroom mirror as we lined our eyes with clumsy, smudgy eyeliner, feeling so grown up and rebellious. We thought we were clever, planning to be back before midnight. But time has a way of slipping through your fingers when you're a teenager. We came rolling up to the house at 1 a.m, our whispers dying in our throats the second the porch light flicked on. There was Dad, silhouetted in the doorway, arms crossed over his chest. My heart dropped into my stomach. He just stared at us as we walked up the steps, shamefaced. He looked at Denise, who immediately crumpled, her face dissolving into tears. "I'm sorry, Daddy. It was my fault." He just sighed, a long, weary sound, and gave his head a disappointed shake. "Go to your room, Denise. We'll talk in the morning." She scurried inside. Then his eyes turned to me. The disappointment was gone, replaced by a cold anger. "You," he said, his voice low. "You I expected better from. You're 16. You know better. You let her do this." I was grounded for a month. A whole month. My phone was taken, my car keys confiscated. The lecture I received lasted until 2 a.m. and covered every bad decision I had ever made or could possibly make in the future. The next morning, I overheard him talking to Denise in the kitchen. He was talking to her about making better choices, about the company she keeps. It was a conversation. I got a sentence. I stayed up in my room afterwards, just staring at the ceiling, trying to swallow the bitterness that was rising in my throat. It felt like acid. So, I leaned into the label they gave me. If I was destined to be the responsible one, then I would do it better than anyone. I would be so responsible, so successful, so perfect, that they wouldn't be able to ignore it. While other kids were at football games, I was in the library. While Denise was discovering boys and parties, I was discovering advanced placement classes and debate club. I poured myself into my books, into my exams, into being someone no one could ever call a disappointment again. It became my armor. I graduated high school with high honors, won a partial scholarship to a decent state college, and still picked up shifts at a local bookstore to cover what the scholarship didn't. I had a 5-year plan. I was going to graduate, get a good job, and build a life for myself far away from their suffocating expectations. I built that life for myself brick by tedious, responsible brick. During those years, those lonely, hard-working college years, I found an unlikely ally, my great-aunt, Mavis. She was my father's aunt, a sharp-witted woman in her late 70s who lived in a small, neat bungalow about 20 minutes from my campus. She had a small, neat house that always smelled faintly of lavender and old books. My parents had actually asked me to check in on her. "She doesn't have anyone, Margot," Mom had said. "Just pop by once a week, make sure she's taking her medicine." It was another chore, another responsibility. But it turned into my salvation. I started visiting her on Sunday afternoons. At first, it was just that, a chore. I'd bring her groceries, maybe help with a leaky faucet or mow her small patch of lawn. But soon, it became the anchor of my week. She'd have a pot of strong tea ready, and we'd sit in her sun-drenched kitchen and just talk. She was the first adult who ever asked me questions about me, not my grades, not my sister, but my opinions. My dreams. One afternoon, after I'd hauled in 4 bags of groceries for her, she patted my hand, her skin thin and soft like worn paper. She looked at me with her clear blue eyes, eyes that didn't miss a thing, and murmured, "You're the only one who bothers to visit, you know. Your parents are always too busy. And Denise, well, I don't think she knows I exist. Don't think I don't notice that." A warmth bloomed in my chest, something so foreign and so welcome. I smiled back, a real smile, not the strained one I wore at home. "I like spending time with you, Aunt Mavis. You don't compare me to Denise." Her eyes softened with a knowing look. "Pfft. That's because you don't need to be compared to anyone, Margot. You're enough, just as you are. They're fools if they can't see that." Her words. Lord, her words stuck to me like a bandage on a wound no one else could even see. For the first time, I felt seen. Not as the responsible one or Denise's older sister, but just as Margot. She became my safe harbor. We'd talk for hours about my wild, secret dream of starting my own business one day. I'd tell her about the frustrations of my classes, about the annoying guy in my economics seminar. She'd tell me stories about her life, about traveling, about the husband she'd lost years ago. She listened, really listened, and her quiet, unwavering belief in me was more valuable than any A+ on a report card. Meanwhile, as I was building my future, Denise just drifted. She dropped out of high school in her senior year, just 6 weeks before graduation. She scraped by with a GED later on, but she had no direction. Her time was filled with a rotating cast of boyfriends, each one seemingly more unreliable than the last. She'd work at a coffee shop for a few months, get fired for being late, then spend a month sleeping on a friend's couch. My parents worried, sure, but their worry always came sugar-coated with excuses. I'd be home for a weekend, and Mom would sigh over the phone, "Denise just can't find her footing. She's so sensitive." "Maybe she'd find her footing, Mom, if you stopped paying her car insurance," I'd argue, trying to be helpful. "Margot, that's not fair," she'd snap back. "She's just more free-spirited than you. Not everyone is cut out for the straight and narrow path, like you were." The straight and narrow. Like my hard work, my discipline, was some kind of personality flaw, something cold and unfeeling. The real drama, the kind that rips a family apart, hit when Denise turned 18. She vanished overnight with a guy named Rick. He was the classic bad boy cliché, a beat-up motorcycle, a worn leather jacket, and a job so flexible that no one could ever quite pin down what he actually did. He was all smirks and mumbled one-word answers, and my parents, of course, hated him. Which only made Denise cling to him tighter. One morning, she was just gone. A note was left on her pillow, scrawled in her loopy handwriting, "Gone to find my own life. Don't look for me." My parents fell apart. It was like their world had ended. My dad called me at my dorm, his voice thick with a panic I'd never heard before. "She's gone, Margot. She's just gone." I had to drive home from college, missing 2 days of classes right before midterms, to be the stable one. I walked into a house of chaos. Mom was hysterical, crying until her voice went hoarse. Dad was on the phone, calling hospitals, begging the police to file a missing persons report. They were convinced this Rick character had kidnapped her. They scraped together money they didn't really have to hire a private investigator. I was the one making them tea they wouldn't drink, the one talking to the police officer in a calm, clear voice. I was the one fielding calls from concerned relatives. And all the while, I felt this strange, cold numbness. Their grief was a closed-off room I wasn't allowed to enter. It was all about Denise. Always. Then, 3 months later, just as suddenly as she'd left, Denise strolled back into the house. I was home for the weekend, sitting at the dinner table with my parents. We were having a quiet, tense meal, the empty chair at the table a constant, screaming reminder. The front door opened. We all froze. And in walked Denise. She wasn't bedraggled or hurt. She looked fine. A little thinner, maybe, but fine. She dropped a duffel bag by the door. "Hey," she said, as if she'd just gone out for a gallon of milk. My mother let out a sound, a half sob, half scream, and flew out of her chair. "Oh, my baby. You're home. You're safe." She clung to her, sobbing. Dad was right behind her, his face a mask of disbelief and overwhelming relief. Denise just patted Mom on the back, looking bored. Rick was a jerk, she explained casually, walking past them into the kitchen and opening the fridge. He was cheating on me. So, I left him. "What's for dinner?" "I'm starving." That was it. That was her entire explanation. No apology. No "I'm sorry" for the sleepless nights, the terror, the thousands of dollars spent on a private investigator. Nothing. And the worst part? They let her get away with it. They were so relieved, so pathetically grateful to have their prodigal daughter back, that all was forgiven in an instant. Mom rushed around to heat up a plate for her. Dad kept patting her shoulder, saying, "That's my girl, you're strong." I just sat at that table, my own dinner forgotten, watching my mother stroke Denise's hair as she wolfed down mashed potatoes. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand on my chair and yell, "Are you kidding me? Do you see this?" I wanted to ask why. Why my smallest mistakes were carved in permanent ink while her life-altering ones were erasable smudges. But I kept my mouth shut. I'd learned a long time ago that in my family, some questions just didn't have answers. I already knew the answer anyway. It was simple, she was Denise, and I was not. And yet, through all of it, Aunt Mavis's voice lingered in my ears. "Trust your instincts, Margot," she'd told me once, pouring me another cup of tea in her sunny kitchen. "They'll rarely steer you wrong." At the time, I didn't know how much I would need those words, how they would become the only compass I had left. The phone call came in my final year of college, on a gray, drizzly Tuesday afternoon. I was in the university library, in my usual corral, surrounded by stacks of books for my senior thesis. My highlighter was hovering over a page of a textbook I would never remember reading. My phone, set on vibrate, buzzed against the wooden desk. It was my dad. I frowned. He rarely called me during the day. I grabbed my bag and hurried outside, huddling under a small alcove to escape the rain. "Hey, Dad, what's up?" "I'm kind of in the middle of." "Margot." His voice was thick, strained. It's Aunt Mavis. She passed away this morning." Quietly, in her sleep. I just stood there, frozen. The rain was dripping off the concrete ledge in front of me. The words didn't seem to register. Gone? How could she be gone? I had just seen her on Sunday. We'd had tea. She'd made me promise to eat better, to get more sleep. Margot? Dad's voice was distant. "Did you hear me?" Yes. "I heard you," I whispered. The phone felt impossibly heavy in my hand. The one person who had never made me feel small, the one who saw me for me, vanished. Just like the closing of a door. The world felt colder, grayer, emptier, in an instant. Her funeral was a blur of black clothes and quiet murmurs. I sat in the front pew, feeling numb. My parents were there, looking appropriately sad, but they were busy greeting distant cousins, accepting condolences. For them, she was a relative. For me, she was my anchor. Denise, of course, didn't even show up. She had a headache. The real shock only deepened a week later when I met with Aunt Mavis's lawyer, a kind, solemn man named Mr. Henderson. His office was downtown, on the top floor, and it smelled of old paper, leather, and furniture polish. He had me sit in a plush chair that swallowed me whole. He cleared his throat. "Margot, your great-aunt Mavis was a very organized woman. She updated her will about a year prior to her passing." He opened a thick folder. She was very specific in her instructions. He put on his reading glasses. "She left a few small bequests to charities, but the bulk of her estate, her house, her savings, her carefully kept accounts, she left it all to you." I just stared at him. "To me? All of it?" "Yes," he said, giving me a small, kind smile. "Her house, which is paid off, and her investment accounts. After all is settled, the total of your inheritance will be just over $150,000. I couldn't process it. The number just hung in the air between us. $150,000. It was more money than I had ever seen, more than my entire college fund. I felt a wave of dizziness. This wasn't a lottery win. This was a weight. A responsibility. A final gift from the only person who truly believed in me. When I told my mother over the phone later that day, her reaction wasn't grief for her aunt. It wasn't happiness for me. It was pure, unadulterated suspicion. There was a long, cold silence on the other end of the line. "She left it all to you?" she finally asked, her voice thin with a surprise that bordered on accusation. "Yes," I whispered, my own throat still tight with a mix of grief and shock. "The lawyer said she'd made the changes last year." Another silence. I could almost hear the wheels turning in her head, the calculations being made. Then, she sighed. "Well," she said, and her tone wasn't one of admiration. "I guess it makes sense. You were always her favorite." It was an accusation. As if my weekly visits, my genuine love for this woman, were all part of some long con to get her money. As if I'd manipulated a sweet old woman into writing me a check. The truth was simpler and, for them, much harsher. I had been there. I had listened. I had cared. Denise hadn't. My parents had barely shown up except for Christmas and Easter. The real explosion came when Denise found out. I'd driven home for the weekend, feeling obligated to help my dad sort through some of Mavis's things. The moment I walked in, Denise was on me. She'd clearly been waiting. "So, I hear you're rich now," she snapped, her arms crossed, her face twisted into a familiar, ugly pout. "Denise, don't start," I said, tired. "No, I'm serious." "That's so unfair," she practically yelled. "You get a college degree, you get a scholarship, and now some old lady just gives you a pile of money. What about me? What do I get?" For the first time in my life, something inside me broke. All those years of swallowing my words, of choking down the bitterness, of being the responsible one, it all came clawing its way out. "What about you?" I shot back, my voice trembling with a fury that stunned us both. "What about you, Denise? When was the last time you even called her? Or sent her a birthday card? You had the same chances I did to have a relationship with her. You had the same chances I did in school. You just didn't take them. You dropped out. You ran off. You coasted. Those were your choices." Her face contorted. "Oh, so you think you're better than me, don't you? Little Miss Perfect with her scholarship and her rich dead aunt. Girls, that's enough." Dad cut in, his voice sharp. And his gaze wasn't on Denise. It was on me. "Margot, don't be so harsh. Your sister, she's just trying to figure things out." There it was again. The same old, tired refrain. Denise was always figuring things out. I was just supposed to already have it all together. I looked from my father's judgmental face to my sister's smug, triumphant one. She'd won. She'd managed to make me the villain again. I didn't say another word. I just turned around, walked out the door, and got in my car. I drove the 2 hours back to my small campus apartment, the entire drive a blur of anger and tears. I sat on my lumpy bed, staring at the little note Aunt Mavis had once left for me, tucked into a book she'd lent me. Her elegant, spidery handwriting read, "Don't let anyone else decide your future, Margot. Trust yourself." That's when I made my choice. This inheritance wasn't just money, it was a gift. It was a chance. It was Aunt Mavis's final act of belief in me. I wasn't going to waste it on a down payment for a house in a town I hated, surrounded by people who would never, ever see my worth. I was going to do something terrifying. I was going to bet on myself. I'd been sketching out a business plan for months, a wild, secret idea I'd never thought possible. A consulting service for small businesses, helping them streamline their operations, manage their finances, and grow. It was my passion. This money, this was my chance to make it real. When I told my parents my plan a few weeks later, after graduation, they looked horrified. "You're going to waste that money?" Mom said, her voice laced with disappointment. "That money could be a down payment on a nice house, Margot. Or you could save it for your future," Dad added, his brows furrowed. "For a family. Starting a business is far too risky. Most of them fail in the first year, you know." I looked at them, my diploma packed in a box beside me. I was done seeking their approval. "I've done the research," I said, my voice steady. "I know the risks. And I know what I'm doing." They exchanged that look, the one I knew so well. Half pity, half disapproval. The look that said, "There she goes, being difficult again." But this time, they couldn't stop me. This time, the money was mine. The first year was brutal. I mean, absolutely soul-crushing. I moved to a city 3 hours away, rented a tiny one-bedroom apartment, and poured every cent of that inheritance and every ounce of my energy into the business. 18-hour days were the norm. My diet consisted of coffee and takeout eaten out of cardboard boxes while I hunched over spreadsheets on my second-hand laptop. I was the CEO, the marketing department, the accountant, and the janitor. Rejection became my constant companion. I'd spend weeks preparing a pitch for a potential client, only to have a man twice my age pat me on the head and say, "That's a cute idea, sweetheart, but we'll stick with what we know." There were nights I'd get home at 2 a.m., cry into my pillow from sheer exhaustion and loneliness, the weight of the risk I'd taken pressing down on me. I'd wonder if I'd made a colossal, life-altering mistake. But every time I wanted to quit, I thought of Aunt Mavis's handwriting. Trust yourself. And so, I kept going. And slowly, painfully, the tide began to turn. A small bakery, run by a woman who reminded me of Mavis, signed on. Then a local hardware store. My first yes felt better than any A+ I'd ever gotten. By the end of the first year, I'd broken even. By the end of the second, I made enough profit to hire my first employee, a sharp, funny woman named Sarah. Her salary was the most terrifying and proudest check I'd ever written. By year 3, I had a real office, not just my cramped apartment, and a small, dedicated team that believed in my vision. We weren't a huge success, not yet, but we were real. We were growing. Meanwhile, Denise continued to float. She'd call me sometimes, her voice all sweet and desperate. "Margot, I'm just in a little bit of a bind. My roommate's flaking on rent. Can you float me a loan? Just a couple $100 to get me through to my next paycheck. I swear I'll pay you back." I gave in more often than I should have. Each time, my parents would praise me. "It's so good of you to help your sister," Mom would say. They never seemed to mind that the loans were never, ever repaid. By the time I turned 27, my company was thriving. We had a solid client base across the state and a reputation for getting real results. And that's when I met Walter. He worked at one of my newer client companies, a mid-sized tech firm. He was their head of IT infrastructure. He was tall, steady-eyed, with a quiet wit that caught me completely off guard. We'd run into each other in project meetings, our conversations usually limited to network security and server capacity. But I noticed the way he'd smile when I made a dry joke, the way his eyes would linger on mine just a second too long. He wasn't flashy. He was solid. One afternoon, after a particularly long and grueling meeting, he caught up to me by the elevator. "Hey," he said, a little awkwardly. That was a lot. "I was wondering if you wanted to grab a coffee sometime? To decompress?" He ran a hand through his hair, and I saw his cheeks turn slightly red. "I've been working up the courage for weeks, to be honest." I laughed, a real, genuine laugh. It felt rusty. "And here I thought you were just really enthusiastic about our new network security protocols." He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made my shoulders unclench for what felt like the first time in years. After so long focusing only on survival and success, it felt strange and wonderful to be seen as more than just Margot, the responsible business owner. With Walter, I could just be Margot. I could breathe. Our coffee date turned into a long dinner. Dinner turned into weekends spent hiking. He was my opposite in all the best ways. He was calm where I was anxious. He was steady where I was always bracing for the next disaster. He listened. He seemed genuinely proud of what I had built. 2 years later, he knelt on one knee on a windy cliffside by the coast, the ocean crashing below us, and asked me to marry him. For the first time in my life, I thought maybe the universe was finally, balancing its scales in my favor. The months leading up to the wedding were a blur of decisions I didn't care much about: flowers, invitations, seating charts. The wedding industry, I discovered, was a special kind of madness. I was so stressed, trying to run my company and plan this event, that I started getting headaches. Walter was my rock. He took over the catering, he handled the band, his calm, steady energy smoothing over my bursts of stress. "It's just a party, Margot," he'd say, rubbing my shoulders. "The only thing that matters is that at the end of it, we're married." One evening, while we were sitting at our kitchen table, surrounded by half-opened envelopes and spreadsheets, I called my parents to confirm the final headcount for the caterer. "Mom," I said, a pen held between my teeth. "I just need to know if Denise RSVP'd yet. The caterer is pressing me." The silence on the other end of the line stretched on just a little too long. I knew that silence. Finally, Mom exhaled, a long, weary sound. "Oh, honey," she said. "Denise, she won't be able to make it. She's going through something with someone new. It's complicated." I closed my eyes, the familiar ache of frustration settling deep in my chest. Of course. Denise's dramas, always taking precedence, always an excuse. "Complicated," I repeated, my voice flat. "Right. Be nice, Margot," she chided. "She just feels terrible about it." "Sure she does," I muttered. But I have to admit, a selfish, guilty part of me felt a sliver of relief. The idea of her showing up, of her making a scene, of her turning my wedding day into a stage for her own theatrics, it wasn't what I wanted. The wedding itself was perfect. It was a small ceremony, maybe 50 of our closest friends and family, by a lake in the early autumn. The leaves were turning gold, and the air was crisp. Walter's hand trembled just slightly as he slipped the ring onto my finger. When we kissed, the cheer that rose from our guests felt like a warm embrace I hadn't known I needed. For once, I was the center of something good, something joyful. My parents even looked happy, though Mom did whisper to me during the reception, "It's a beautiful cake." Denise would have loved this cake. On our brief honeymoon in Maui, Walter and I walked barefoot along the sand, the warm water curling around our ankles. We talked about our future, about dreams we could build together, maybe buying a house with a real yard, maybe even starting a family one day. I found myself smiling at the idea of the future for the first time, instead of just planning for it. I felt safe. I felt loved. But when we returned, real life pressed in quickly. One evening, as I was unpacking our suitcases, the scent of sunscreen and salt still clinging to our clothes, Walter leaned against the doorframe of our bedroom. His voice was careful, tentative. "I've been thinking about making a change," he said. "What kind of change?" I asked, folding a sundress. He told me his company, the tech firm where we'd met, was going through a major restructuring. His role was being absorbed, and his options were either a demotion or a severance package. He hesitated, then added, "So, I've been thinking. What if I came to work for you? You've been saying for a year that you need someone to handle IT and operations. That's my wheelhouse. I could take all of that off your plate." I stopped what I was doing and stared at him. "Work together? As husband and wife? Walter, that's really risky. Mixing business and marriage." "I know," he said, walking over and taking my hands. His were warm and strong. "But I wouldn't suggest it if I didn't believe in us, and in you. Think about it. Less travel for both of us, more time together. We'd be building something side by side, our own family empire." I lay awake that night, long after he'd fallen asleep, weighing the risks. It felt like walking a tightrope in a storm. My company was my baby, the thing I'd built from nothing. But he was competent. I knew his work ethic. I trusted him more than anyone. And beneath all my fears, I was so tired of carrying everything alone. I wanted a partner, a true partner, in every sense of the word. A week later, after drawing up a formal employment contract, I agreed. We set clear boundaries, established distinct roles. He was the director of operations. I was the CEO. No talking business past 8 p.m. No bringing work arguments home. And for a while, it worked. It worked beautifully. The company grew. Walter streamlined our systems, he managed our vendors, he took a huge load off my shoulders. I was free to focus on sales and expansion. We landed our biggest client to date. I felt, maybe for the first time, that I wasn't fighting my battles alone. I had a partner. I had a husband I could count on. Life was good. Which, of course, is always when the other shoe decides to drop. It was a Tuesday night, late. I was setting my phone on the nightstand, ready to sleep, when it lit up with an incoming call. Mom. It was nearly 11. My stomach instantly clenched. My mother only called that late for one of two reasons, a death or Denise. I almost let it go to voicemail. I was so tired. But something in my gut, a little knot of dread, told me to answer. Hello? Margot. Her voice was tight, and I could hear she'd been crying. I need to talk to you about Denise. She's back home. I sighed, rubbing my temple. Mom, what is it this time? It was bad, Margot. This new guy, he was awful to her. She finally got the courage to leave, but she has nothing. She's a wreck. She needs help, Margot. She needs stability. I closed my eyes, pressing my thumb against my temple, trying to ward off the inevitable headache. The same old story. Mom, I can't be her safety net again. She needs to learn. She needs a job, Mom pushed, her voice starting to crack, the tears coming on full force. You have a successful business. A big business. Surely there's something she could do there. A receptionist, anything. She just needs a chance. Family helps family. I let the silence stretch, the old, bitter resentment bubbling up. The memory of Denise's smirk at the dinner table after Aunt Mavis's will was announced burned in my mind. She's never kept a job for more than 3 months, Mom, I finally said, my voice low and flat. I can't risk my company, my employees' livelihoods, on a maybe. I have payroll. I have responsibilities. Just meet with her. Mom interrupted, her voice pleading now. Please, Margot. She's changed. I promise. She's been taking classes. She just needs one person to believe in her. Aunt Mavis. Aunt Mavis would have wanted you to help. Her words cut deep. Using Aunt Mavis's name felt like a key turning in a lock I didn't want to open. It was a dirty move, and it worked. I told her I'd think about it and hung up, my heart pounding with frustration. I vented to Walter, who was reading in bed next to me. I expected him to back me up, to agree that it was a terrible idea. Instead, he closed his book and looked at me with that calm, reasonable expression of his. Maybe you should give her a chance, he said gently, placing a hand on my arm. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? You give her an entry-level position. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. I frowned at him, pulling away slightly. You don't know Denise like I do. She's a black hole, Walter. You give her an inch, she takes a mile. He shrugged, his expression still gentle. Maybe not. But she's your sister. And family is important. People can change, Margot. His words unsettled me more than my mother's pleading. Because if even Walter, my logical, steady husband, the man who knew my family history, thought Denise deserved another chance, then maybe I was the one being unreasonable. Maybe I was the one stuck in the past, unable to forgive. And so, against every screaming instinct in my body, I told my mother I'd see her. When Denise walked into my office a few days later, I almost didn't recognize her. The transformation was staggering. The messy ponytails, the smudged eyeliner, the wrinkled band t-shirts, all gone. She wore a tailored black blazer, a modest shell underneath, and slacks. Her hair was pulled back in a neat, professional bun. Her makeup was minimal and tasteful. She sat across from me in the visitor's chair, her back straight, her hands folded politely in her lap, and a small, almost timid smile on her lips. Thank you for seeing me, Margot, she said, her voice steady, but softer than I remembered. I know I don't have the best track record. And I know you have every reason to doubt me. I just studied her, searching for the cracks in this new facade. It was a perfect performance. My instincts were screaming, a loud, blaring alarm in my head, it's a trap. It's an act. But my mother's pleading and, more importantly, Walter's reasonable words echoed in my ears. What if this time is different? Mom said you were taking classes, I said, my voice all business. I am, she said, leaning forward and sliding a thin folder across the polished surface of my desk. I finished, actually. Inside was a certificate from a year-long business administration program at a local community college. I've been working hard, she said, her eyes meeting mine. They looked sincere. I needed to prove to myself, and to you, that I'm serious about changing. I'm not that person anymore, Margot. I just need a start. For a long moment, I just stared at the paper. The Denise I knew barely had the patience to finish a meal, let alone a year-long course. And yet, here she was, sitting in front of me, dressed like a professional, speaking like she belonged here. It was a perfect, flawless costume. Against my better judgment, a judgment that was screaming at me to send her away, I relented. 3-month probation, I said, my voice firm. That's all I can offer. You'll start as an administrative assistant. You'll answer phones, you'll file, you'll get coffee. And you'll report to Walter. He'll be your direct supervisor. Her face lit up with a relief that looked so genuine it almost convinced me. Thank you, Margot. Thank you. I won't let you down. I promise. I placed her under Walter's department. It seemed safest. He was my husband, the director of operations. He was logical and fair. He'd see through any laziness, any shortcuts, and he could report back to me honestly. To my absolute astonishment, the first few weeks passed without a single incident. Denise was a model employee. She showed up 15 minutes early every day. She stayed late. She was eager, polite, and shockingly competent. She charmed clients on the phone, she organized files I'd had in storage for years, she even seemed to anticipate what was needed before she was even asked. More than once, Walter came home in the evening, kissed me in the kitchen, and said, you know, your sister, she's really good at this. She's a natural. She's actually good with people. The clients like her. I'd force a smile, but a tight knot would form in my stomach each time he praised her. This wasn't the sister I knew. This perfect, efficient employee was a stranger. And maybe that was the problem. Maybe I didn't know her anymore. Or maybe this was all just a very, very good act. As weeks turned into months, I started to travel more for work. We were scouting new locations for expansion projects in 2 other states. I was gone for a week, then home for 2, then gone for another 4 days. Each time I returned, I'd find Denise more seamlessly woven into the fabric of my company. The probation period ended, and I had no reason not to hire her full-time. Walter even suggested a small raise. Employees would chat with her by the coffee machine in the break room. She organized a welcome baby gift for Sarah, my first employee, who was out on maternity leave. Walter praised her efficiency in our weekly meetings. Denise handled the vendor issue, he'd say. Denise streamlined the new client intake. I started to feel like an outsider in my own creation, a visitor in the life I had built from scratch. The unease grew. It was a quiet, creeping thing. One evening, we had a small staff gathering at a local restaurant to celebrate landing that big new contract. It should have been a happy night. I was circulating, talking to my team. I looked over and saw Walter and Denise standing near the bar, laughing together at some inside joke. Their faces were turned toward each other, their heads tilted in a way that felt too close. Too familiar. My skin prickled with a strange, cold feeling. I immediately brushed it off. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was letting my old resentments, my old childhood wounds, color what I was seeing. He was her boss. They were friendly. That was good, wasn't it? But when I tried to join their conversation, smiling, Denise's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. It was like a curtain slipping, revealing something else underneath, before it was yanked back into place. Walter put an arm around my waist, but it felt automatic. Something wasn't right. That feeling, that tiny, persistent itch of wrongness, grew heavier when Stanley started acting strange. Stanley was our head of security. He'd been with me from the early days, back when I just had the small office. He was a retired police officer, a big, gruff guy with a dry wit and a habit of calling everyone kiddo. He was loyal to a fault, fiercely protective of me and the company I'd built. I trusted him with my life. But now, he avoided my eyes in meetings. He'd cut conversations short when I walked into the break room. He, who used to drop by my office every morning with a gruff "Mornin', kiddo," now just gave me a curt nod. And sometimes, when he thought I wasn't looking, I'd catch him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite place. It was a look of deep, profound pity. One night, a Thursday, I was working late. Everyone else had left the office. The building was quiet, the only sound the low hum of the servers. I knew Stanley was still on site, doing his final rounds. I called him into my office and closed the door. He stood in front of my desk, not sitting, shifting his weight, restless. He wouldn't meet my gaze. "Stanley," I said, leaning forward on my desk. My voice was quiet, but firm. "Something's bothering you. I can see it. You're not yourself. And it has to do with me. So please, just tell me what it is." He hesitated, his gaze fixed on a spot on the carpet. He looked like a man carrying a heavy, impossible weight. He let out a long sigh. "Ms. Wynne. Margot," he said, his voice low and gravelly. I didn't want to be the one. I kept hoping I was wrong. A chill, sharp and icy, crept up my spine. "The one to what, Stanley? Show me. Tell me. Now." He wordlessly pulled his company tablet from under his arm. He tapped the screen a few times and then, his face grim, handed it to me. "This is from the camera in the main office hallway, near the back storage rooms. It's time-stamped from last week. Tuesday. When you were in Chicago." My heart sank. I looked at the screen. It was grainy, black and white footage. I watched Walter and Denise walking side by side, laughing about something. It looked innocent enough. Then, he reached out, his hand brushing against hers. Her face tilted up toward his. And suddenly, they were kissing. It wasn't a peck. It was a deep, passionate, hungry kiss, pressed up against the wall before Walter grabbed her hand and pulled her into the darkness of the storage room. My mouth went dry. I couldn't breathe. The air in the room felt too thin. My fingers trembled as Stanley, his face a mask of stone, swiped to another clip. "This one's from 2 weeks ago. East hallway. Different day, different corner of the office. Same betrayal. And this one, from the parking garage, after hours." Over and over, a silent, grainy montage of my life falling apart. "How long?" I finally asked, my voice barely a whisper. I couldn't look up from the screen. "I'm sorry, Margot," Stanley said quietly. His eyes were heavy with a sorrow that mirrored my own. "I first saw something suspicious about 3 months ago. Almost right after her probation ended. I've been documenting it. 3 months. The tablet felt like it was burning my hands. All those late nights she'd supposedly stayed to catch up on work. All those glowing reports from my own husband. All those times he'd told me I was the one being unreasonable. All of it happening under my roof, in my company, in the life I had built with my own 2 hands. The world tilted beneath me, and I felt like I was in freefall. I drove home in a complete haze. I don't remember the 20-minute drive. I just remember my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly the skin on my knuckles turned white. Every stoplight, every mile between the office and the beautiful house I had bought, I replayed the images in my mind. Walter's hand on the small of Denise's back. Denise tilting her head up toward him like she belonged there. The bile rose in my throat, hot and acidic. When I walked through the front door, the house smelled of garlic and tomatoes. Walter was humming in the kitchen, stirring a pot of pasta sauce, a picture of domestic, happy normalcy. The sheer, oblivious happiness of it made me want to be sick. "Hey, you're home early," he said with that easy smile that had once made my heart flutter. Now, it just looked like a mask. I didn't answer. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt cold. I walked over to him, pulled out my phone, and pressed play on one of the videos Stanley had sent me. The one in the hallway. I held it up right in front of his face. The sound of their own muffled laughter, the little gasp from Denise, filled the cozy, quiet kitchen. Walter froze. His eyes locked on the tiny screen, and every single drop of color drained from his face. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut. The wooden spoon, covered in red sauce, clattered from his limp hand onto our clean tile floor. "Margot," he stammered, his voice suddenly thin and reedy. I can explain." "Explain what?" My own voice trembled, not with sadness, but with a white-hot fury I didn't know I possessed. A toxic mix of rage and gut-wrenching heartbreak. "Explain how you've been sleeping with my sister in my company's hallways? In my building? Explain that to me, Walter." He took a step toward me, his hands reaching out. "Listen, it was a mistake. A stupid mistake. It didn't mean anything. Don't you dare touch me," I spat, recoiling as if he were on fire. The dam of my composure finally broke. A scream, a raw, animal sound of betrayal, tore its way out of my throat. "Pack your things and get out. Get out of my house." He just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, speechless. "I mean it, Walter. Pack a bag and get out. You're done here, both of you. You're fired." His lips parted, then closed. He saw the look in my eyes. He knew there was no room left to argue, no lie he could tell that would fix this. He just nodded, turned, and walked toward our bedroom. That night, I sat alone at my desk in my home office, the smell of burnt pasta sauce still lingering in the air. My hands shook as I drafted the official termination papers for both of them, citing gross misconduct and violation of company policy. Signing my own husband's name on the line that officially ended his career at my company was the most surreal, painful, and necessary thing I had ever done. The next day, my phone started ringing off the hook. It was my mother. Over and over. I ignored her calls. I ignored the flood of texts. "Margot, call me. It's an emergency." I knew what it was. I ignored her until I couldn't anymore. The moment I answered, her frantic, hysterical voice filled my ear. "What is going on, Margot?" "Walter's at our house. He says you fired him. Denise just got an email, she's locked out of the system, she won't stop crying. You need to come over here right now and fix this." Fix this. The sheer, unbelievable audacity of it, the command to fix this, almost made me laugh. It was a hysterical, broken sound. "Did you know?" I asked quietly, my voice eerily calm. Her silence said everything. "Margot, it's not that simple." "I'll be right over," I said, and hung up. When I arrived at my parents' house that evening, it was exactly as I'd imagined. A trap. A tribunal. They were all there, a united front waiting to ambush me. Mom, Dad, a red-eyed, tear-stained Denise, and my husband, Walter. The four people who should have been my foundation now looked like strangers. Margot, thank God, my mother started, rushing toward me. This is all a terrible misunderstanding. I put up a hand, and she actually stopped. I didn't say a word. I walked past her, to the large television in their living room, connected my phone, and played one of the videos on the big screen. The silent, grainy image of Walter and Denise kissing, her hand tangled in his hair, filled the room. Mom gasped theatrically, her hand flying to her chest. Dad suddenly found the floor incredibly interesting. Denise covered her face and let out a loud, theatrical sob. How could you? My voice finally cracked, the ice in my veins finally melting into pure pain. How could all of you betray me like this? For a moment, a single, fleeting moment, the room hung heavy with something that might have been guilt. But then my mother recovered. Her expression hardened, her sympathy evaporating, her loyalty snapping back to its default position. Margot, nobody meant to hurt you. These things, they just happen. People fall in love unexpectedly. Denise lifted her tear-streaked face from her hands, and in a voice trembling with practiced, fragile vulnerability, she said, "We didn't want it to happen, Margot. But we couldn't stop it. Walter and I, we're in love." Walter, my husband, the man who had vowed to love and cherish me, reached over and took her hand. I thought my stomach might actually turn inside out. And then, Denise delivered the words that were designed to split my world in two, the final, calculated blow. I'm pregnant. The air left my lungs in a painful rush. What? Almost 4 weeks, she whispered, her free palm resting delicately on her flat stomach. We were going to tell you next week. I staggered back as if she had physically struck me. That doesn't excuse what you did, I said, my voice shaking, clinging to the last shred of control I had. That's when the atmosphere in the room shifted. The guilt was gone, replaced by steel. Walter leaned forward, his tone no longer apologetic, but cold and hard. You can't fire us without cause, Margot. That's illegal termination. We'll sue you. I let out a bitter, strangled laugh. Sexual misconduct in the workplace isn't cause? Conspiring behind my back isn't cause? My father finally spoke, his voice sharp with judgment, and it was aimed not at them, but at me. You're overreacting, Margot. Nobody should lose their livelihood, their insurance, over a personal mistake. Not with a baby on the way. You have got to be kidding me, I muttered, looking at their stone-cold, righteous faces. Denise sniffled, her tears already drying into cold calculation. I am under enormous stress because of you, she declared, her voice gaining a surprising strength. My doctor says the baby could be at risk. I have medical documentation. I stared at her. Medical documentation? You planned this? She lifted her chin, defiant. We're getting married as soon as your divorce is finalized. And you'll pay for everything you've done to us. Firing a pregnant woman, the courts will destroy you. Your clients will love that. My mother nodded furiously, her loyalties crystal clear. She needs stability, Margot. You need to reinstate them both, immediately. And frankly, they deserve a raise for all this emotional distress. Or what? I asked, my voice dangerously low. Or we'll file a lawsuit tomorrow, Walter said flatly. Wrongful termination. Emotional distress. Endangerment of an unborn child. How do you think your clients will react to those headlines? How long do you think your business will last? My dad sighed dramatically, the final nail in the coffin. We don't want it to come to that, Margot, but you've left us no choice. You need to do the right thing. I looked around at their faces. My mother, who once told me to protect my little sister. My father, who lectured me about duty and responsibility. My husband, who vowed fidelity. My sister, who had always taken everything I ever worked for. And in that moment, I realized I was completely, utterly alone. They were a family. And I was the obstacle. Without another word, I turned around and walked out. If you're still listening, please help me out by liking this video and commenting the number 1 down below, just so I know you're this amazing, and I understand that you're on this journey with me. Your support is a huge encouragement and cheers me on. Please, comment the number 1 so I can recognize you, and now, listen to the rest of my story. The morning after I walked out of my parents' house, the air still buzzing with their threats, I didn't cry. I got cold. I got clear. I picked up my phone, but I didn't call my friends. I didn't call a therapist. I called a man named Byron, a name that had been whispered among business circles in my city for years. He was a divorce lawyer, but he was known as a shark, a litigator with a reputation for being as sharp as a scalpel and as unflinching as stone. When I met him in his intimidatingly sleek downtown office hours later, I laid out the whole sordid story. The family history, the affair, the pregnancy, the termination, the threats of a lawsuit. I was all business. I left the emotion at the door. He listened quietly, his face impassive, making a few precise notes on a legal pad. When I finished, he steepled his fingers, looked at me with piercing, intelligent eyes, and asked one question that stopped me cold. "Margot," he said, his voice quiet but intense. "Are you sure the betrayal is only happening in your personal life? People who cross boundaries there," he tapped his pen on the desk, "often cross them elsewhere. Your husband was your director of operations? With access to your accounts? Have you checked your company's finances?" My heart lurched. I felt a wave of nausea. No. I trusted him. He handled all the vendor payments, the expense reports. "Get me an independent forensic auditing team," Byron said, his voice flat. "Today. Before they file. Let's see what's really been going on in your company." Within days, a team of forensic auditors descended on my company's books. They took over my main conference room, their briefcases and laptops covering the long, polished table. It was agonizing. For a week, I tried to run my company, tried to reassure my employees, all while this team was quietly digging through every invoice, every expense report, every vendor payment I had trusted Walter to oversee for the past 2 years. The results, delivered to me in a thick, bound folder a week later, made my stomach drop to the floor. It was so much worse than I could have ever imagined. I sat in Byron's office as he walked me through it. It wasn't just an affair. It was a systematic, calculated robbery of my company. My company. The one I built from Aunt Mavis's inheritance and my own sweat. There were forged invoices for services from companies that didn't exist. Phantom consulting fees paid out monthly to shell companies. And when the auditors traced the bank accounts of those shell companies, they led straight to a secret account in Denise's name. But that wasn't all. Walter had been siphoning money for months, slipping funds out like water through a cracked pipe. And Denise, her expense reports were a work of fiction. Luxury clothes, spa treatments, even a week-long vacation to Mexico with Walter, all disguised as business development trips and client entertainment. And then, the final, gut-punching betrayal. Monthly consulting payments, for thousands of dollars, going straight to my parents' joint savings account. Payments that had started just 2 months after Denise was hired. They were all in on it. The whole family. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't falling in love. This was a conspiracy. When I sat across from Byron again, the papers spread out on his desk between us, my hands trembling with a rage so cold it burned, he just nodded grimly. "This isn't just infidelity, Margot," he said, his voice flat and serious. "This is felony fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Their lawsuit is a bluff. We'll fight their threats with evidence of actual crimes." True to their word, they struck first. Within a week, I was served. Lawsuits from both Walter and Denise. Wrongful termination. Emotional distress. Discrimination against a pregnant woman. Walter demanded alimony, half the company, claiming he was instrumental in its growth. Denise paraded her pregnancy as both a shield and a sword. And, just as they'd promised, my parents filed affidavits supporting them, swearing under oath that I was unstable, that I had a history of vindictive jealousy, and that I had targeted my poor, pregnant sister out of pure spite. The first day in court felt like walking into an execution chamber. Denise arrived pale, one hand resting protectively on her belly, a perfect, fragile image of impending motherhood. She wore a simple, modest dress. Walter walked beside her, his jaw tight, his eyes cold as ice, playing the part of the protective partner. My parents flanked them like loyal bodyguards. Together, they looked like a family. And I, the one who had been lied to, cheated on, and stolen from, looked like the bitter, lonely outsider. During cross-examination, Denise's smarmy attorney leaned in with a sneer. "Ms. Wynne, isn't it true you fired your sister, your own pregnant sister, out of jealousy? That you've always resented her?" "No," I said firmly, my voice echoing in the quiet courtroom. "I fired her for inappropriate conduct in the workplace and for financial misconduct, which we have documented extensively." On cue, Denise burst into tears. A loud, gut-wrenching sob. "She's trying to make me lose my baby," she wailed, clutching her stomach. "The stress she's causing," my doctor said, "it could endanger the pregnancy." The judge called for order, but the theatrics worked. I saw the jury members shifting uneasily in their seats, their eyes glancing at me with suspicion, with distaste. But Byron stayed calm. He was a master. He let them play out their entire performance. And then, he began to dismantle it. One by one, he laid down the evidence like a surgeon exposing a deep-seated infection. Bank statements showing the flow of money. Emails between Walter and my father discussing the consulting fees, with my father joking about his easy new promotion. The authenticated security footage of the affair, played on a large screen for the entire court to see. The expense reports, with their charges for tequila shots in Cancun and $500 handbags. And then, the dagger. The business administration certificate. The one Denise had so proudly shown me in my office. Byron called the registrar from the community college to the stand, who testified, under oath, that they had no record of a Denise Wynne ever attending, let alone graduating. The certificate was a poorly made forgery. But the most devastating blow, the one that made my mother audibly gasp, came from Byron's private investigators. They had traced Denise's past. They had uncovered the pattern. They found 3 different men in another state who had filed police reports against her for credit card fraud, only to mysteriously withdraw their complaints weeks later. Byron presented evidence, bank transfers from my parents' account, showing they had quietly paid those men off, thousands of dollars in hush money, shielding Denise from consequences, just as they always had. "This isn't an isolated mistake, Your Honor," Byron told the judge, his voice steady and powerful. "This is a pattern of calculated, predatory deceit, supported and enabled by her parents. My client is not the villain here. She is the victim of a long-term, coordinated conspiracy." For the first time, I saw cracks in Walter's cold armor. He avoided my gaze, his jaw clenching and unclenching. Denise, no longer crying, was whispering furiously to her lawyer. My parents looked smaller, older, and more pathetic than I had ever seen them. The trial stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Months of my life were spent in that cold, sterile courtroom. Every day felt like peeling back a new, festering layer of betrayal. The financial toll was brutal. My legal fees were mounting into the stratosphere. My company wavered under the public scrutiny. The headlines were a nightmare: Sister sues pregnant sister. Family feud over business. My employees were nervous, my clients were wary. I was hemorrhaging money and credibility. But Byron was relentless. Piece by painful piece, he dismantled their entire performance until the only thing left standing in that courtroom was the ugly, undeniable truth, a web of lies, greed, and betrayal spun by my entire family. The verdict loomed like a storm on the horizon. The final day in court felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Every sound seemed sharper, the shuffle of papers, the bailiff's cough, the judge's gavel echoing against the wood. I could hear Denise's staged, watery sniffles from 2 rows behind me. When the judge finally cleared his throat and began to speak, the entire room held its breath. Based on the overwhelming and deeply disturbing evidence presented in this case, he said, his voice ringing with authority, his eyes sweeping over Walter, Denise, and my parents, this court rules in favor of the defendant, Ms. Margot Wynne. The words struck like thunder. Walter's head dropped into his hands. Denise let out a strangled gasp, clutching her stomach as if the ruling itself physically threatened her pregnancy. My mother muttered under her breath, "No, no, this can't be," while my father sat rigid, his face ashen, his jaw clenched, his eyes glassy with silent rage. The judgment was merciless. And it was total. All funds siphoned from my company were to be returned, with interest. Walter was found guilty of embezzlement and felony fraud. The judge, citing the callous and predatory nature of his crimes against his own wife, sentenced him to 3 years in state prison. Our divorce was finalized, effective immediately, with no alimony for him whatsoever. Denise, due to her pregnancy, received a suspended sentence but 5 years of strict probation and was ordered to pay restitution. My parents escaped criminal charges, as Byron couldn't prove their direct knowledge of the fraud, just that they had accepted the money. But their finances were in absolute ruins, drained by their own legal fees and the court-ordered repayment from their now frozen accounts. As the gavel struck one final, definitive time, I felt no triumph. No joy. No rush of victory. Only a vast, cold, hollow emptiness. I had won. But I had lost my entire family. Outside the courthouse, a swarm of reporters shouted questions, cameras flashing like lightning in a storm. "Margot, how does it feel? Were you surprised?" I walked past them in silence, Byron at my side, my spine straight, my head held high, but my insides hollowed out. In the weeks and months that followed, I tried to settle back into a life that was no longer mine. The first thing I did was sell the house. I couldn't stand to be in it another night. I put it on the market, sold it for a loss just to be rid of it, and moved into a smaller, modern condo near my office. A space with no memories, no ghosts. A space that was just mine. At work, I held an all-hands meeting. I stood in front of my employees, my team, and I told them the truth. All of it. I explained what had happened, honestly and transparently. I apologized for the instability and the distraction. Some looked at me with a new, profound sympathy. Others with a lingering doubt. But I just kept showing up, day after day, until the rhythm of work returned and the whispers finally faded. My parents tried calling at first. Then the letters began to arrive. Long, rambling, self-pitying pleas for understanding and forgiveness. "You've ruined us," my mother wrote. "How could you do this to your family?" I blocked their numbers. I returned the mail, unopened, with "return to sender" written in bold, black ink. Denise sent nothing. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard the news. I heard she had given birth to a boy. I heard that she and Walter had married in the bleak, fluorescent-lit prison visiting room, a quick, joyless ceremony. I heard that she was now living with my parents, the 4 of them crammed into my small childhood home, struggling to make ends meet on my father's meager pension. Sometimes, late at night, when the city was quiet and I was alone in my new, clean apartment, a sliver of guilt would try to slip in. I would picture a baby, an innocent child with Walter's eyes and Denise's smile, caught in the wreckage of his parents' greed. But then I'd remember. I'd remember the coldness in Walter's voice when he threatened to sue me. The pure, chilling calculation in Denise's tears. The way my parents chose them over me, chose the lie over the truth, every single time. They hadn't just betrayed me. In the end, they had destroyed themselves. So, I chose not to feel guilty. I chose to heal. Instead, I poured myself into rebuilding. My company, my real family, the one I had built myself, expanded. We landed the Chicago contract. We opened a new office. We doubled our client base within a year. I found a new strength I never knew I had. I also joined a trauma support group, a circle of strangers in a church basement who had all had their lives shattered in different ways. They sat with me, they listened, and they taught me something my family never could: solidarity born from honesty. Dating felt impossible. Well-meaning friends tried setting me up, but I always smiled politely and declined. I'm focusing on my career right now, I'd say. But the truth was, I was focusing on healing, on learning how to trust my own judgment again, how to trust myself after being so gutted by the very people I should have been able to trust the most. One night, while unpacking an old box, I found a photograph of Aunt Mavis and me, taken at a county fair years ago. She was laughing, her arm looped through mine, her face crinkled with pure joy. And her voice, clear as a bell, echoed in my memory. "Trust your instincts, Margot. They'll rarely steer you wrong." I should have listened sooner. I didn't then, but I will now. The future feels uncertain, yes, but for the first time, it feels completely and totally mine. Every step I take forward, every new client I sign, every morning I wake up in my own quiet, safe home, it's on my terms. Not anyone else's. For the first time in my life, I'm not living in my sister's shadow, or under my parents' judgment, or in a husband's betrayal. I'm standing alone, and I've never felt stronger. Thank you for listening to my story. I know it was a long one. If you've been through anything like this, or if you just want to show some support, please leave a comment below. It means the world to know I'm not alone in this, and that you've been here with me. Thank you.